I'm Ryan Joe. I'm the editor-in-chief of ADWEEK, in case you forgot. Thank you so much for being here for this, not a panel, it's a group chat called The Targeting Remix, Context, Behavior, and the Battle for Relevance. All right, so I'm just going to kick things off by having each person introduce themselves, who they are, their title, and to answer this question, what's the worst ad that's ever been targeted to you, and did you buy it? Mario, why don't you start?
Oh, well, thank you for the challenge. Mario, 7-Eleven. The worst ad is not one ad, it was a collection of ads, and I always share it with my team as marketing vomit. And it was all the ads that were played when we were in the middle of COVID, and they look exactly the same.
Very good. Jennifer Andre, I head up our ad sales team at Expedia Group. And, you know, the belly fat ads, remember the era of the belly fat ads? Those are the worst.
Hi, I'm Lisa Pillette. I was the global CMO of the Fossil Group, which is a portfolio of brands that focus on watches and accessories. I had to buy my mother Depends once, and I get a lot of Depends ads. Do I use those? No, I don't use Depends, but I get those ads a lot.
My name is Katie. I work for a company called SMG. We run retail media networks on behalf of retailers. The worst ads that I've ever had, I got caught in a weird Amazon targeting loop. So I bought a light, I got targeted with more lights and more lights and more lights for essentially eternity. So showing where personalization can go wrong.
Hi, everyone. Kerel Cooper, CMO at GumGum. We offer a contextual advertising platform. The worst ad is similar to both of you. Any product that I just purchased and then got retargeted for again and again and again.
My name is Amy Hugh. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of New York Life Insurance. I was going to say that a product from Nordstrom's that I had purchased a week before.
Kristen DiCorleto. I lead marketing for the CVS Media Exchange. Very similar. After I had a baby, I was targeted for Depends. So I think it was just the wrong kind of diapers for a long period of time.
Hi, I'm Mike Nuzzo. I'm the head of data at Hearst Magazines, and I get targeted with dad T-shirts, which is weird because I'm not a father, and I'm offended because it must speak to like my humor or like lack thereof. I must love dad jokes, so that's my worst ad.
Great. I'm Ryan Joe. As you guys know, for me, it's kind of those Instagram videos. Like you watch one video of, say, an interesting bug, and Instagram thinks that you really like bugs, and they keep stepping up the intensity of the bug videos that they send you, as if it's sort of like, let's just see how far we can go. So it's I have to kind of just lay off of that. All right. So since we're talking about like contextual targeting, I'm actually just kind of wondering, to the marketers here, is that actually like a part of your plan? Is that something that you actively think about or incorporate? And is it valuable to you guys? Amy, why don't you start?
Yeah, I think that the remarketing is still a tactic. It's especially recency. It's really important to chase someone who's come to your website that hasn't purchased anything, and to especially if they bounce. But it is still very difficult to collect the data with real time to make sure that when you do retarget, contextually it's relevant content. It's still important. I think it's a lot about data, kind of compilation and making sure that's right. With recency makes it a little bit more difficult, but extremely effective tactic.
I mean, the issue, I think, we were just kind of like all talking about getting like retargeted too much, and I feel like, recency is sort of like a big, facilitator of that retargeting. So I kind of wonder if, maybe we go overboard on that a little bit.
Well, I was going to say, from my perspective, we really found contextual targeting useful in new customer acquisition and inspiring customers at a research phase for a considered purchase. So if we were working with a partner or a platform and we would create content for that and it would run, then we'd understand really quickly through contextual targeting what was working and what wasn't. But it would give us insights that would allow us to iterate and then find new customers at a research phase of our products. So it wasn't always just retargeting. It was also just creating content to acquire new customers and finding what was working with them at the upper part of their consideration.
I feel like, especially with context, it's there's like, for instance, there's a 7-Eleven state of mind, and I'm kind of wondering if that's something
I live in one 24/7.
does that factor into how you think about your targeting and audience strategy?
Well, so for us, the things we sell immediate consumption items, right? So for us, the context is which you're buying that inside the store is very important for us. Outside of the store, which is more top of the funnel, contextual is I'm not sure what we would target in that, because we sell sips, snacks, and cigs, right? So I can't advertise it as cigs, so it's sips and snacks. Are you thirsty? I don't know. I can do that in the store. Outside the store is more sort of about the brand and the products we sell and Slurpee.
I think it probably all depends on how you define contextual advertising, right? Because even in the example of like a convenience mission like you have at 7-Eleven, actually often there's some forms of contextual targeting you probably can do. I just don't know if they would always be truly classified as the core of contextual advertising, like mission-based targeting, meal for tonight. It's like I can target someone at 4 p.m. on the way home from work to go and pick up a bottle of wine and some food for that evening. Or I can use like weather-based targeting, ice creams, perfect example in convenience of something that I might want to trigger someone on their route to a store. So I guess it all depends on that kind of definition of contextual advertising and how broad or tight you kind of keep it.
If I can add on to that, I mean, the way we think about it is about consumer mindset, right? Every single one of us around in this round table and in this room, we have a bunch of different things that we like. We have a bunch of different things that we're interested in. It doesn't mean that we are interested in it, 24/7, if you will, right? So there are times where, if you are someone who likes to travel, you're reading travel content. There are times where, sorry if there are any Knicks fans in here, you're very upset if you're, if you just lost a series to the Pacers, right? And that's what I mean about mindset, right? And so it's like, how do you go about delivering the right message when the consumer is in the mindset to be receptive to your product?
Yeah. How does a company like GumGum determine mindset?
Yeah, so great question. Thank you for asking.
Mail.
So we determine it by understanding what that person is actually consuming at the time, right? So we have the ability to understand the entire article that someone is reading to put it in its proper context. We have the ability to understand what someone is listening to from an audio perspective, or if they're watching a video frame by frame, right? And so based off of that, then we can say, okay, let's deliver this ad with this message. So that's how we determine mindset.
So would you say rather than looking at audience and who they are, it's what they're doing at the moment?
Yeah. Now, I get it. Audience is still important, right? But we believe that there's a world of, where we can move beyond, basic demo information to help brands connect with who they want to connect with and provide a great experience for them.
I think
Do you connect the two, the audiences as well as
We can.
the contextual and what they're doing right now, their behavior?
Yeah, we can.
And I work commerce media, so everything that we do is contextual. And so it's this conversation is so interesting to me because, if we're a site that has a massive data set, you've got logged in users and we sell stuff. And so we know if somebody's searching a flight to Nice, okay, airline X, you want to fill seats and going into Nice, they're going to have much more of an effective campaign if they're doing it real time versus just targeting somebody who may eventually want to go to Nice.
Right. And there's an expansion of that, right? If you know someone is looking to travel to Nice, right? It can be airline ads, of course, but it can also be,
sunscreen.
Right? It could be think of everything you all packed in your suitcases to come here, right? It could be all of those products.
And I think that's where the real intersection is. On the CVS side, we actually just announced a partnership with Reddit, where we're taking our 90 million addressable users and their 160 Redditors and using clean rooms to really match that data together, and then using that contextual relevance in those community conversations to deliver the right content from our brand partners. So if someone is, saying, what should I wear at Cannes 25, like what are the trends on the French Riviera, we can then serve up, again, contextually relevant content within the CPGs that are advertising on our platform, and just really in a really trusted space, deliver that content. And that's a really basic example, but where it really kind of comes to life is when people are asking those intimate questions too around their health and wellness needs, and how do we serve up that trusted message, either from like our chief medical officer all the way through to the brand experts in that space as well.
Right, and I think what both of you are saying is what I like to call providing the consumer with a great digital experience, right? We all know that no one is online to receive advertising. They're online to receive content, right? And so how do we as marketers enhance that digital experience by providing a great ad experience, not the ads that we all talked about in our intro?
And I think from a publisher perspective,
personalization.
Yeah.
Sorry.
from a publisher perspective, in your marketers, we have to figure out who the right person is. And I think we talk about remarketing. I think we conflate addressability with identity all the time. And I think there's this understanding that Amy, you kind of touched on this a little bit. It's like, if someone were to say, what's the magic formula? I'd say proprietary taxonomy, so you understand the context of the content, because that's important. Understanding the behavioral signals, not just what they're reading, but what they're doing holistically. And then having AI that adapts and learns. And when you do those three things, you actually find those unexpected connections. Yes, sunscreen, but also people who travel, because we've done this, tend to be very interested in their own careers. And because we see that, that's an opportunity when we see a travel signal for a company like you to be like, oh, maybe these people who travel disproportionately also are interested in finance. And so I think that's something where you see insights, content, and behaviors all coming into one thing. And publishers see that.
I'm curious from the marketer's perspective and how the creative has come together. I think that's where we struggle a little bit. I think we've used clean room technology, so the behavioral advertising, the audience targeting, that's great, but then the adaptation of the creative to be contextually relevant, we struggled a little bit on that. We know that AI is on the forefront, haven't quite kind of hatched that magic signal of, all of those things together. Was curious from the other advertisers if they had any kind of tricks or things that they found successful.
It's still a challenge for us, honestly, and I think
I'm so glad to hear that. Maybe it's just
we always joke that we're doing the D and the C and not the O. And that's actually one of the main conversations that we've been having here, is talking with a lot of partners and understanding where they are in their journey of being able to real-time ingest that data and then using AI to optimize the creative and the assets, and that it's also in an engaging and pleasing way, that it doesn't feel like cookie cutter templates.
I think it's the pleasing way, because the DCO will do it, but it
doesn't look, it's not, no one wants to engage. They're just blocking that content out.
I find the DCO can be more damaging than it is effective for your creative optimization.
I agree. I agree.
Is it that bad, really? Because they've been at that for a long time.
I don't think it's that bad, but I think it's what we've talked about before, like the bug and, it's just the increasing. I mean, I don't know if the bugs get bigger or weirder or
more copious.
But it's a variation of whatever you could put in your DCO. And I think consumers are so smart. I mean, just because you're switching out your call to action or your headline, it's not really moving them down the consideration path, because it's sort of just trying to put out more recency and frequency than it is really customization. Well, I think AI has the promise of that, but we haven't seen anything, and we haven't tested to be successful yet.
I used to be in grocery, and we had a really good use case for DCO, which was, so in a grocery store, any given day, there's about 2,000, 3,000 products that are on sale, right? And the primary communication vehicle is a printed paper circular that goes into a mailbox that some people read, but majority of products that are on sale, never there. So what we used to do is we would load, these are all the product, all the images, and based on who you were, we would build a 5-product carousel of things that you cared about that were on sale that week in the supermarket. And your carousel would be different than yours and yours and yours and yours and yours. So for us, that was fantastic because there was the ability to get, if tofu's on sale, you would find out, right? But we were not changing the headlines or anything like that. It was just switching out the product depending on who the person was.
I think back to content for a second, contextual. We own a site called Delish. And back to the grocery thing. When you are in a certain genre, think of a food delivery company like Uber Eats or Instacart, you can dynamically create an ad if you're reading about making pizza that looks more like you're making an Italian meal. Mm-hmm. And I think then you're bringing like something that looks relevant to the page, to the ad. Mm-hmm. And we've seen tremendous success when you tie those two together. But again, that's not audience based necessarily. It's more back to the page itself. And I think we are going back to understanding how that actually can be optimized in ways that is more performant often than just following someone around and being like, you're this person, right? You care about ham on sale.
I agree with that.
We've shifted to almost all to native advertising, and it's all based on the traveler's real-time behaviors. They don't even really know that they're being served up an ad. And when you think about how painful travel planning is, there's ways to make that additive, and that's where advertising really works, right? You're not disrupting, you're not getting in the way, you're actually helping that purchase move along. Mm-hmm.
We had done a partnership with Dotdash Meredith, and we were assuming that because we were a higher priced watch brand, one of our brands, that we would align more with fashion-oriented consumers, but we found it was more travel-oriented consumers who were looking for customization of their products for all the outfits that they were wearing, and that informed our creative strategy, like you were saying, and then we were able to evolve that same look and feel of our brand, but to just kind of put forward more of the messages of a feature of our product that was more relevant to what they cared about. And it was not like we were going in thinking of that was going to be important. We were thinking we were talking about fashion and style. We're actually talking about a feature of a product, and that type of insight that came from contextual targeting allowed us to change our creative. It looked fine.
I think for us, it's because we're in the financial services vertical and not a CPG. Like that contextual relevancy of the pizza or the grocery store or even native for traveling. It's because we're life event triggered. And so we do have to compel someone to want to spend thousands of dollars. So I think for me, I would love, anybody in this room can send me an email afterwards or a connect to say, like, how do you become more persuasive? And when you're really trying to get someone to do something that they don't want to do, which is like financial planning. I think that's the challenge for something that's super and cool to advertise for.
I mean, I'm not going to give you an answer, but I'm going to give you a perspective.
I love it. I'll take anything.
I'll give you that.
I'll take anything.
We in this industry talk about data all the time, and we're kind of talking around it now, but people don't respond to data. Like we think they do. Like we're like, oh yeah, I'll signal and we're going to serve them that. They respond to relevance and resonance.
That's right.
And so it's how do you use
creative.
The latent insights that we just talked about to make them feel understood? Because if they feel understood, then they will interact with your brand. But we tend to ignore the human part, and we're still human at the core and intelligent around the edges. If we can bring that concept back, I think then you have an understanding of it. And it doesn't have to be one-to-one. You can have small cohorts of people who look and feel similar. But this whole data is a person or just a bunch of ones and zeros, we're a little bit more complex than that, I think.
I think we're also having different actions at different times, right? Yep. It's like I'm 53 and I'm a woman. I don't want to be served up ads about menopause when I'm scrolling through my, CNN content. But if I'm on WebMD and I'm looking for symptoms of what's going to help that, then that's actually an additive experience for me. And I would
Nothing's going to help, I can tell you.
I know. But, financial planning, capture the people in the moment when they're going to be thinking about that versus just assuming that this person, based on their age and who they are going to be open to it in that moment.
I think there's a difference between kind of passive contextual relevance and active contextual relevance. So you think like that's a perfect example of that, right? Like you don't want someone bombarding you with those messages, but if you're seeking it out, being there in a relevant place with relevant content is really important. I actually think that's where kind of retail and commerce media has some advantages versus other kinds. Like sometimes, and sorry, you might be reading kind of content, you're reading it in a newspaper, a magazine, you're not passive, you're not actively kind of consuming something. In a commerce context, you're actively looking for something, you're browsing for that product, you've sought it out. I think that's a difference that we should probably distinguish between two.
100%.
That's a really good point because, I mean, what we do is we sell the drinks and snacks, and everybody buys drinks and snacks. We have a very small marketing budget, and what we do, we have this thing called the Brain Freeze Collective is our in-house panel. We have 300,000 customers there. One of the big things we do is we try to figure out what are the tribes that really represent the 7-Eleven customer. And they tend to be very influential. So one of them, for some reason, there's this thing called the cars of 7-Eleven. There's people who trick up their cars, put spoilers and lower them and paint them all crazy colors. And they love to take pictures of their cars outside of 7-Eleven. And that's, if you go to Instagram and type in cars of 7-Eleven, you'll get thousands and thousands and thousands. So for us, it's very important to market to that culture. So a lot of our targeting is anybody who's into tricking up cars, we want them to be in 7-Eleven. Yeah. And that has a massive halo effect to people who would never trick up their car, but think it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yes, I think there are two things there that I find very interesting, right? You're talking about these sort of sub-communities, sub-cultures of your consumers, right? And then even within that, without even defining it or saying the word contextual, what you're doing really is, right, contextual. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yep.
How do you be relevant without being like annoying and overdoing it? Because I feel like that's just the age-old problem of digital advertising, and it honestly doesn't seem to be going away.
I think that's where, though, being contextually relevant, right, has an advantage versus other forms of targeting. Like some forms of super hyper personalization just genuinely are creepy, and you can read data right from a consumer sentiment perspective that can pitch this on both sides. Some people say I want really, really hyper personalized stuff. Some people say I absolutely hate it, it's creepy. Most of us probably as human beings sometimes find it a little bit creepy. But if you're advertising in an environment where it is relevant content, if it's a magazine that you're reading, if it's a topic that you're really interested in, if it's a shop that you are actively browsing for a product category that you've bought before, that doesn't feel creepy, that doesn't feel intrusive to the experience. So I actually think that's probably where contextual advertising has an advantage again over other forms of targeting.
And we like to call it Bobs and Betties versus Bits and Bytes. You're actually talking to real people in a real moment, and they are having an experience, and they're going to have a positive association with your brand if you're showing up at the moment that they are in. Yeah. If we are targeting them solely based on demographic or behavioral or past things, we're all very complex people. If I'm booking travel for my daughter's lacrosse game, I'm going to be in a very different mindset of what type of hotel that I'm going to want. It's not a luxury hotel, but if I'm doing something else, coming to Cannes, that's a different story. And so I think that's really where contextual targeting is coming in.
I just, from a brand perspective, I also think, if you're a brand that's also a retailer, back in the day, you'd want to know who you were on the floor with, right? You want to know who your pad was. Who are you next to? And to me, it's just kind of that same way of also positioning our brands in the right way to make sure it's reinforcing our equity or our positioning. And we used to do this, at Ralph Lauren. This was just kind of a core part of media strategy before it was called contextual marketing. You just wanted to make sure you either had the right share of voice or you had the right positioning on the page and you were with the right adjacencies. Yep. And I think the technology has advanced, but the concepts of the same thing of who are your adjacencies at retail, it's who are your adjacencies. Yeah. And as a brand builder and someone who, yes, wants to be culturally relevant and contextually relevant, I also want to make sure I'm protecting the equity of the brand and I'm positioning us in a place that's relevant or reinforces values that we care about. So it's also important from the brand's perspective, not just from the consumer who's receiving the ad.
One thing you're talking about that, because what you're saying is right. It hasn't really changed. We just have these tools that we're going off the deep end on, but the job hasn't really changed. one thing we do is we have, for retail media, we double down on in-store audio because we need to get the consumer really fast. And we were doing a campaign for an energy drink company, right? So this is contextual within the convenience store. The majority of energy drinks are sold between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m., like the vast majority of them. We were playing the ad on the in-store radio the whole day. And then we analyzed the performance, the uplift in units. There was 0 uplift in units between 7 and 9 a.m. because the customer was already going to be there.
They already
right?
made up their mind.
So we're wasting that.
Yeah.
But that's what the energy drink company wanted. I want my ad in heavy rotation during that time. No incremental uplift. And all the uplift we saw between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m., they got a massive uplift. It was I think it was like a 15% or 20% uplift. And so the context was different, and we're trying to advertise to the context we already know. If you use the tools and the data, you have to find a separate occasion. Now, the thing we can do is the reason to buy an energy drink at 7 a.m. is very different from the reason to buy that energy drink at noon or at 4 p.m. So what we're doing is now tweaking the creative to figure out, can we boost this even more, but let's stop wasting money at the 7 and 9 a.m. That's already sold. Right. They're going to come anyway.
But that's what's great about contextual. Or you can take it, structure it, you're turning patterns into predictions and then predictions into performance. The equation is not that hard.
Say that again very fast.
Patterns into predictions, predictions into performance. Because that's actually what we want. That's how we're looking at people. Your car, souped up car people, that's just a pattern that you noticed. And then you're going to amplify it somewhere else. Yep. We all can see these patterns evolving, and contextual actually allows us to do it really nicely because you can shrink down people's behaviors, almost throw them out the window and say, like, what are they consuming when they do it, as opposed to who are they? Which is really hard to do because we are all very dynamic.
One of the things that some of you mentioned, I think Lisa, it was, you kind of learned something new about actually you did too, Mario. You learned something new about your audience, or your audience isn't who you thought it was, and then you have to kind of change things up really fast. So how quickly were you able to kind of get those insights, and then how quickly were you able to kind of adapt a campaign?
A lot faster than it would have been for us to build an audience strategy. I'll say that, right? Because we were seeing something of what they were doing, and we were getting that feedback back within 48 hours, and we could then turn the creative around within a day. So it was fast. And that, I think, is part of the benefits of the new technology and the new platforms is the speed. It's that you're seeing what they're doing in real time. You get that feedback and that data and those insights in real time, and you can adapt very quickly. I think that's one of the biggest shifts from what we used to have to do to try and connect the relevancy, and what platforms like I think GumGum and Teads and things can help us do is do it quickly. So it was within a couple of days that we did this.
I was just also wondering, what were the signals that you got that made you realize, oh, that's actually a travel audience?
Well, because of the for Datosh Meredith, they had a travel and leisure property, and we ran across the platform, and we saw more of our ads pop in that platform than in other parts of their portfolio. So they were just giving us and saying, hey, your Michelle watch is really relevant with the travel and leisure audience. And what we knew and what they shared with us is, people are always looking for outfit changes. They're also they want to go out at night and day. And so it triggered for us to go, well, we have different bands for Apple Watches, and we have these different products. Why don't we try to serve a customization message, not just a style or brand? And so that is how we kind of adapted. And we had some of this creative. I mean, it's within the arsenal of our creative bank, because we have creative about the brand, we have creative about the seasonal story, but we also had features and benefits creative. And so we just kind of it's not like we went out and shot something completely different. We repackaged, like I think you were saying this, a lot of what we had to say, well, this is more forward to might be more relevant in that moment. So it was like when you think of, brand down to, brand storytelling all the way down to features and benefits, we elevated more of the features and benefits of our product in the travel and leisure vertical than rather telling the brand story about style and more of a fashion story.
And I think what I love about what you're saying there is there's conversations happening between you and your partners, right? Yes. To your point earlier about, we've gone off the deep end with technology, right? I think when you think about the planning process, the touch points throughout the life of a campaign to optimize, I think we do probably rely on technology too much, and I think between brands and agencies and technology partners and publishers, there needs to be more conversation to strategize on the best way to move forward.
And I do think the team was also looking at sentiment analysis as well as a way to kind of validate some of the contextual work to make sure that there was true relevance or, interest. It wasn't just coming from the publisher. I think we also looked at a third input in terms of sentiment analysis.
You had to validate it, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's how we did it, through sentiment analysis.
I'm just wondering, does Reddit and the availability of Reddit data change targeting at all?
Yeah.
I know I kind of thought of that because you have that partnership.
Yeah. I mean, I think any platform that you're entering into a partnership or collaboration with is truly understanding who their users are. So as well as the advertiser. So on the retail media side, it's even more complex because you have your brand, so CVS. You have all of the marketing that our marketing teams are doing. They're reaching our customers. Then you have the CPG or the pharmaco that is doing their own advertising, and then bringing those two together and then layering on those publishing platforms, which is why the clean room technology is so important in truly understanding who these people are, but also really understanding how all of those customers are being targeted together, and making sure that you truly understand what each of those brands are doing when, because you could be on a page, you're running a partner ad, a co-branded ad, they're also running an ad, and so you don't want those wasted impressions, but you also want to be able to understand the performance of how that campaign is working against those audiences in real time. So having those real-time dashboards and having that data that's available to all three of those entities is so important, and having that really open dialogue once that campaign gets in market around what's working, what's not working, being really transparent in how you shift your dollars, change your strategy, real time in campaign, whether that's changing your audience strategy, your channel strategy, or your creative strategy.
Wondering if anyone else has any thoughts there, because I'm sure there's an R fossil. I'm pretty sure there's an insurance subreddit, and I'm just wondering if that impacts how you guys think about your targeting strategies.
I mean, for me, it's not necessarily advertising that I think about for things like Reddit, but just I don't know if any of you are also responsible for the AI SEO that's about to come and emerge. So looking at consumer sentiment, and it's something that we haven't really ever done before, because the SEO search, and I think we just finally kind of understood what Google's doing, and now we have all these AI that we have to think about. But that I think what we're going to do is we're going to try to experiment with some of that data from an advertising perspective to try to see if it transcends over to our SEO strategy, because that contextually relevant information is also going to be so important in the query return for SEO. And since it's such a black box, the only way to sort of hypothesize and triangulate is probably do experimentation in advertising to see if you can pop that over. So that's what I think about when I hear about user-generated content, Reddit, all these other things, and how does targeting and contextually relevant information create a whole ecosystem of understanding keywords in a different way.
That's interesting. Is AI search going to give us more data, more information, or will there be less just because you don't have any visibility into it?
Well, I think it's going to be, I mean, you're going to ask, you can see it right now. You ask something in Google, you get the Gemini response there.
Yep.
I don't need to click on any of those links.
Mm-hmm.
So all that inventory that my eyeballs were going to get, they don't get it anymore.
That's right.
What's going to happen then is they're going to continue to be quality websites that used to feed those links that there was sort of an understanding there. See, I do my content, I let you crawl through my website, so the link you sent me eyeballs, and then I monetize with Of course, through your own Google Ad server, but on my website, that may disappear. What is that going to do to the content that isn't?
That's right.
I don't
It's
know.
no longer a
right?
linking strategy, which
Yeah.
is what we learned for SEO. It's going to be a content strategy. So contextually relevant content.
But who's
is-
going to create that content if you can't monetize it through ads because nobody ends up in your?
I mean, that's the general unknown. Like, so do you try to harness and leverage more user-generated content within the, within your brand? Like try to we used to not want people to talk about New York Life Insurance and user-generated content, but maybe that needs to change.
There's no bad publicity, apparently.
Well, there could be. I mean,
I think as like a consumer brand, we're more connected to the audiences that way, and we're more responsive. And I think we do love user-generated content when because of the. I mean, I heard the panel before was like, don't use the word authenticity, so I'm like really nervous about saying authenticity.
Just
but
said it twice.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think we look at those as actually sources of inspiration. And then often we'll either feature that or work with them. And, it's actually just more of a, that's a great source for us, especially because there are Reddits about some of our brands. And it's a way that we inform a lot of what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think our influencers are obviously the great example of that.
Yeah.
But now that there's so many up and coming wannabe influencers as well, so there's so many people putting out content on the regular around the brands, the retail store interactions, whether it be the colleagues that they're engaging with, the pharmacists in the store, like that's a huge part of the brand, the products we carry, showing them in use, where they buy them, and how do you enter in that conversation in a way that just feels really additive to the experience, is something that continues, obviously, to really win the hearts of the consumers.
Yeah, that's interesting. What does contextual look like in the kind of the era of rampant UGC, the creator era?
I think it
I
also.
might have to. Oh,
Go ahead.
no.
We use influencers to really kind of tie that point of inspiration back to shoppable content. So, for example, we have an influencer that's going to Cannes, and we can create, curated hotels. And so for us, it's really about, we know that travel and social is playing a huge role in that inspirational phase. But how do you go from getting inspired to go to Cannes to actually figuring out how to get there and then closing that gap? So that's sort of how we see the contextual relevancy there in the realm of social and influencers.
That's where I think publishers still have a spot.
That's
It's
what I was
scary.
gonna
Like
say.
we fill that
Trusted
gap, right? You get
partners.
inspired somewhere, but then you actually have to go find information
Yep.
somewhere else, and that's why what you were talking about, like you don't have to click anymore. Like that's scary to a publisher. But if we can hang on, they're going to run out of content to fuel their LLMs, and we actually do our research. It's real, and I think there is a place for true large publishing that's trusted. Not that UGC is to be untrusted, but it's vetted differently.
I would say the same. I think you have to balance it with trusted partners because they have readers that trust them for their voice and authority, and working with those partners actually is very important to also balance out your total mix. Just like if you're going to look at how you spend, you want premium programmatic. All you want is to reinforce the equity of your brand. So your trusted partners matter, your premium networks matter, your premium positioning matters, and then you find ways to support that with things that are, I'd say, more in real time or more with people who are the closest to the consumer. And that's how we kind of think about that. But it has to go back to trust. And trust for us and trust for the readers of the partners that we work with.
And I think, again, bringing it back to contextual, right? The more brands make sure that their messaging is showing up in relevant places, right? The more they will gain the trust of consumers.
That's true.
Well, you're gonna love this question, Kerel. What can't contextual do today, right? We talked about like some of the great things that it does enable, but what are its limitations?
I mean, from my perspective, right, what we do at GumGum is we focus on how do we bring contextual relevancy and help publishers monetize, right, as well too. So what we don't focus on today is the influencers, right? So anything sort of outside of the traditional domain of digital advertising is not where we are focused today, right? That doesn't mean that that's not where we will be focused tomorrow. So if someone is coming to us looking for influencers, that's not what we do today. So I would say from our perspective, I wouldn't say that that's a limitation, but that's just not our focus, right?
Sometimes I think, yes, the optimization of campaigns and contextual can sometimes be harder to read for that reason.
Yeah.
Because you're not doing a one-to-one, you're not reading a direct signal.
Yep.
Sometimes optimizing
Right.
contextual campaigns can be harder.
I would also say, and again, I don't phrase this as a limitation, but we do talk about how contextual can help with brand safety, right?
Yeah.
So if you think about how brand safety is traditionally done today by keyword blocking, right? Because we have the ability to read the entire page or the audio or the video, we can put specific keywords that traditionally brands like to block in its proper context, right? Because sometimes a specific keyword is okay depending on the context, right? So we can help in cases of brand safety, but I don't like when contextual is defined as a pure brand safety solution, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's interesting. It feels like so often it is, you know.
Well, quite frankly, right, brand safety has become a very dirty phrase these days, right? And we just like to focus on how do we help deliver a brand's message in contextually relevant places. And if you think about it along those lines, it is brand safe, right?
Yeah.
I'll give you a complexity. It's not a limitation. False positives. You will get an article because you assign multiple keywords or phrases to a page, and it might be an article in Elle Decor about Chrissy Teigen's home, and she loves to cook salmon. It'll get tagged as a fish page. Is it about fish? Maybe, potentially, but it's probably more about home decor and those things. And so when you look at back to like the finite versus infinite, when you just use keywords, you get a lot of complexity and false positives. And so that's just like a cautionary tale of like, make sure if you're working with someone that they also understand their content through their own proprietary taxonomies as much as
Right.
just throwing keywords at a page.
Right. And again, I'll just give us a plug. That's why our technology focuses on reading the entire page and putting it in its proper context, because that page could be defined as multiple categories, right?
I think
All right.
it comes back to the like adage though, doesn't it? Just to sum up that bit, it comes up back to the adage that like all forms of targeting are wrong, but some are useful. And that's like a good example of that, right? Where context is very, very useful, so therefore it's helpful, even if in some cases it has limitations or is even a tiny bit wrong.
Great. I'm getting the hook soon, but I'm going to ask one more. So what have you learned at Cannes so far this year that you're going to take back home?
I have to say, I was in a conversation yesterday, and it was a little terrifying in that so many of these conversations are going to change because all of the influencers are going to be AI generated, and all the content's going to be made for advertising, and all of it's going to be, you know, we're going to have to kind of, what do we go back to? What's the fundamentals that are the most important? And is it, you know, brand? And is it experiences and things that are happening in real time? Because so much is going to be fabricated that we're going to have to kind of start from what's real and what's not. Just the AI influencer proliferation. Just
And the way people are discovering content. I mean,
Yeah.
it's completely being disruptive. And I think what I have seen is just there's so many different businesses here, a lot of them doing the same thing. And I'm not a marketer, I'm on the sales side, but if I were a marketer, I would struggle with that because it's like, what are the different value props of all of these different companies and what are they doing in this space? But it's been pretty exciting to learn.
I saw some really interesting content this morning about agentic commerce and how that will change the kind of path to purchase for most people. Like in theory, in a few years' time, the way that we buy anything could be dramatically different versus how it is today. And most traditional marketing is based on some form of funnel or path to purchase, whether or not you believe those exact models. It's still based on that. Those are very likely to be disruptive heavily. So I think it's about rethinking that whole journey and trying to figure out how we anticipate some of those changes that are coming.
I was having a chat with somebody who was telling me, yeah, but outdoor will still be relevant. And I'm not sure. Like if your car is driving itself, you may not be looking out the window. So we don't know what's going to happen.
We may be looking out the window more, though. Just to take it the opposite direction.
Not if you have your phone in your hand. Right?
Yeah.
Looking at the screen. What I've been hearing is sort of what you both are saying in terms of getting back to the basics of how do I make sure I'm creating a great consumer experience with my brand.
All right, I got the sign to wrap it up. So I got to do that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.